4.5 years of what seemed like a foolproof relationship were shaken in an instant. The carefully planned special dinner ended with a "not now" that echoed like thunder in this man's heart. Distrust grew, culminating in a betrayal he never imagined facing. Through tears, phone calls, and sleepless nights, he wonders, was his love just an illusion? I thought a lot before deciding whether to share this or not, but I figured I might need some advice, so I decided to post it. My girlfriend, whom I'll call Wendy, and I are both 26 years old, and we have been, or were a couple for the last 4.5 years. We met at a convention center while working at an event there. At that time, we had both just started our first jobs after college and had recently moved to the area where we live now. We exchanged business cards and left it at that. On the Sunday after the event, I couldn't stop thinking about her, so I decided to text her and ask if she'd like to go out for a drink sometime. She responded immediately, saying yes and asking which day I had in mind. I asked if I could call her to discuss it, and she replied, "Sure." I called, and we ended up talking for over 90 minutes. We discovered we had so much in common, and the conversation flowed so naturally that I knew something special was about to happen. We set up a date for Wednesday night at a place near her apartment. Although we lived in the same general area, our apartments were about 35 minutes apart, so I decided to be a gentleman and go to her. The first date was supposed to be just drinks, but we got along so well that we ended up having dinner and staying at the place until almost closing time. Nothing happened between us that night, but I knew that next time sparks would fly, and I was more than ready for it. 3 days later, we met again for dinner, but this time, after dinner, I ended up spending the night at her apartment. In fact, I stayed until Sunday afternoon before finally heading home. I didn't want to leave, but I had to work the next day. All I can say is that I walked out of there completely exhausted and out of ammunition, if you know what I mean. After that, we officially became a couple. Our physical chemistry was always incredible, at least for me. We always got along well, genuinely enjoyed each other's company, and never argued, at least until recently. After 4.5 years of what I considered an ideal relationship, I thought the time was right to propose to Wendy. We had talked about marriage multiple times before and agreed that we both wanted to get married someday, so I thought it would be a simple thing. The timing felt perfect. I knew she wouldn't like too much attention, so I didn't plan anything extravagant, just something special and private. I made a reservation at one of her favorite restaurants, and after dinner, we ordered coffee and dessert. That's when I pulled out the ring box and handed it to her. She asked what it was, and I replied, "I think you know." She opened the box, and I could see in her eyes that she was shocked. I thought it was because of the size of the stone since I had really invested quite a bit, but no, I was wrong. She was surprised, but not because of the diamond size. What she did next started the downward spiral that would end our relationship. She looked at me and said, I'm not ready for this. We're not ready for this." Then she closed the box and handed it back to me. I did not expect that reaction. I wasn't prepared for it. I was speechless. She noticed my disappointment and quickly started saying that she wanted to marry me someday, but now wasn't the right time. She said it wasn't the right time for either of us. Seeing that I wasn't taking it well, she moved to my side of the table and started kissing me, telling me how much she loved me and reassuring me that marriage wasn't necessary for us to keep loving each other. She said something like we should just enjoy things as they are since our relationship had been so good. Her words didn't reassure me, and I remained silent for most of the time. We finished our meal and went back to her apartment. On the way, she tried to get me to talk, but I stayed quiet. I wasn't angry or giving her the silent treatment as a punishment. I just needed to process everything. When we got to her apartment, she started touching me. I told her I wasn't in the mood, but she insisted, taking off all her clothes and starting to undress me as well. At first, I resisted, but then she started doing things I couldn't resist, so I let it happen. I thought to myself that at least it would help ease what had just happened. However, I didn't do anything in return. It was a good night, but I was still affected by the rejection. When you propose to someone, it's something serious, something real. But now what? I needed to think. I wanted to leave and give myself space. It was Saturday, and she had planned for us to spend the day together, but I told her I needed time alone and that I was going to leave. She got upset and didn't want me to go, but I insisted that I needed to, and she finally let me. I went straight home and spent my time thinking about how everything had gone so wrong. She called me at least half a dozen times to check if I was okay, if we were okay, or if I needed anything. I realized she was worried about how I was handling everything. To be honest, I wasn't happy. Even though it was nice to have her attention, something had changed in our relationship. I didn't feel the same way about her anymore. That was the first moment I started to doubt and wonder if she was really the right person for me. On Sunday, she came over to my place, and we immediately went to bed. Then we spent the day by the pool. It seemed like everything was fine, but to me, everything felt strange. The following week, she called me every day at work to check on me. She was worried that I was pulling away from her, and rightfully so, because without realizing it, I was. On Friday, she came over, and we planned to spend the weekend together. That night, we went out with some friends and had a great time. On Saturday morning, we were by the pool and then went to a sports bar to watch a baseball game. When we got back, we settled on the couch, ready to relax and decide what to watch on Netflix. Suddenly, she moved closer to me, kissed me passionately, and said, "Yes, yes, love." I knew what she meant, but I asked her what she was talking about. She replied, "Yes, I'll marry you." I wasn't expecting that. Looking back, maybe I should have just said yes and moved forward, but I didn't. Instead, I told her that I had been thinking about us and had come to the same conclusion she had the week before, that it wasn't the right time and that we should wait a little longer. I expected her to handle the situation the way I had, and that we'd have a civilized conversation, but I was caught off guard when it turned into a huge argument. She asked me why I had changed my mind. I told her again that I agreed with her initial response and thought it was best to leave things as they were for now. Then she said, "Jesus, are you holding it against me because I needed time to think about the most important decision of my life?" I replied that last week, she hadn't said she needed time to think. She had been clear and direct in saying no. And now, I was simply agreeing with her. We argued about it for a few minutes, and she started getting furious. At one point, it looked like she was about to explode, so she got up and walked out. I got up to follow her, thinking she had just gone outside to get some air, but instead, she was already in her car. She gave me a look of pure contempt and sped off down the street. She had never shown that ugly side before. I was stunned. It was a huge red flag. Out of everything that happened, that look of contempt was what really got to me. I admit I was more than a little upset with her reaction, so I didn't call or text her that night. She didn't contact me on Sunday either. I thought about calling her, but I told myself, let's see how long she can go without calling me, and maybe some time apart would do us good. When I hadn't heard from her by 6 p.m., I left her a voicemail. Then, I sent her a text around 9 p.m. Finally, she called me back at about 10:30 p.m., and we ended up talking past midnight. During the call, we decided, or rather she decided, that we needed some time apart to recalibrate our relationship. I agreed, but it left me feeling uneasy, and I started questioning our relationship even more. We spent the following week apart. However, Wendy still called me at least once a day. In every call, she told me how much she missed and loved me, but she didn't seem in any hurry to end our separation. The ball was in her court now. I decided I wasn't going to beg for us to get back together. That had to come from her. Still, I thought everything was fine and that we'd be back to normal in no time. That brings me to what happened the day before yesterday. Out of nowhere, I got a message from a friend of Wendy's, whom I'll call Deborah. She said she needed to tell me something and asked if I had time for a call. She had never called me before, so I immediately called her back thinking it was some kind of emergency. When she picked up, she said she had something personal to tell me and that she preferred to do it in person. I asked if she could give me a hint, but she said she'd rather wait until we met face to face. I couldn't wait to hear what she had to say, so I agreed to meet her that night at a local bar. When we met, she told me that over the past week, Winnie had been seeing a guy she met at work. Let's call him Randy. He works for a company that has some connection to Wendy's, and he had recently gotten divorced. According to Deborah, Randy had been flirting with Wendy for months, and she had finally agreed to go out with him. That Saturday, when she left my house, she met up with him somewhere, and they ended up spending the entire weekend together. The whole weekend. That explained why Wendy hadn't called me until late Sunday night, and why she had asked for time apart. I was furious, and I knew our relationship was over. There was no coming back from that. Deborah told me she knew this would probably ruin her friendship with Wendy, but she didn't care because she couldn't live with herself knowing I was being deceived like that. She also told me that Wendy's other friends knew about this, including the details, and warned me to be careful when talking to them. I believe Deborah because she was an honest person and the only one in Wendy's friend group who seemed decent. Deborah said she was shocked by Wendy's decisions and hadn't spoken to her since she found out. She also said she wouldn't say anything to Wendy until I took action regarding the situation. I thanked her and told her I would keep her updated. After that, we went our separate ways. Naturally, I was deeply affected by all of this and spent the rest of the night consumed by a strong feeling of anger and loss. Yesterday, at work, Wendy called me 3 times and left messages, but I didn't answer. I wanted to wait until I was alone at home to talk to her, as I planned to end the relationship over the phone. At that point, I was furious and didn't want to be anywhere near her. On my way home, I imagined different scenarios and knew that the first thing I would do after breaking up with her was go straight to my place. To avoid confrontation, I packed a bag and booked a hotel room near my job. I ended up calling her around 7 p.m. When she answered, she immediately asked where I was and why I hadn't responded to her calls all day. I was furious and didn't waste time beating around the bush. I told her straight up that I knew she was cheating on me with Randy. She went completely silent, but I could hear her breathing heavily. When she didn't say anything, I told her our relationship was over and hung up. An hour later, she called again and left a message saying she was in my apartment, asking where I was. 15 minutes later, she called again, saying she had already gotten inside and would stay there until I returned. Throughout the night, she kept calling and texting, crying and saying she could explain everything, insisting that her relationship with Randy wasn't what I thought. And that's where things stand as I write this. I feel relieved that it's over, but I've just realized the huge emptiness in my life now. I really loved her, and I keep wondering if I did the right thing. Did I give up too soon? I know I can't go back, but the doubt lingers. Can a couple overcome something like this? I can't. I still love her and truly can't imagine life without her, but I also can't imagine being with her after what she did. I feel lost and confused. Here's an update. It's been 7 weeks, and against the advice of most of you, I decided to meet with Wendy to hear her side of the story. I wanted to see what she had to say and if she would be honest with me. We met 3 days after my initial post at a park where we used to go for walks. We sat at a picnic table in one of the pavilions, far enough from people for privacy, but still visible so things wouldn't get out of hand. I arrived 15 minutes late, and she was already sitting there, waiting for me. I could tell she was nervous when she stood up to hug me. I hugged her back, but not like I used to. It was the kind of hug you give a distant cousin you haven't seen in years. She immediately started saying how sorry she was and that she never meant for this to happen. She said her relationship with Randy wasn't what it seemed and that they only started talking after we began having problems, after she rejected my marriage proposal. Funny, I didn't know we were having problems. I asked her to tell me the truth about her relationship with him. She said it was just a friendship and that they confided in each other during tough times. I asked how long she had been talking to him. She said they met at work last year, but had only spoken a few times throughout the year. The friendship grew when he started his divorce process. She said she never told me about him because she didn't think it was important, that he was just someone she dealt with at work. I asked when that friendship turned into something more. She told me it was after he got divorced when he vented to her over the phone. According to her, they had a good conversation, and that was what led her to call him after I withdrew my marriage proposal. I asked how far things had gone between them. She said nowhere. I didn't sleep with him, if that's what you're asking. Then she asked how I knew about him. I lied and told her I followed her that night when she left my apartment and saw her go into his house. When she heard that, her expression completely changed, and I could see she was uncomfortable. I told her I waited outside Randy's house, but she never came out. The next morning, her car was still there. At that moment, she started crying and looking away, rubbing her hands nervously. I asked why she lied. Why not just tell me the truth? She said, you know why? I didn't want to lose you. Now crying harder, she admitted that things had gotten physical between them, but she downplayed it, saying it wasn't anything serious. Basically, this is what she said. We didn't have real sex. I just touched him a few times. I didn't even bother responding. I just shook my head in disgust. She kept apologizing and said she had cut off all contact with Randy and was even willing to quit her job if that's what I wanted. I told her there was no possibility of us getting back together after what she did, and that the only reason I met with her was to close this chapter. She insisted on trying to convince me to give it another shot, to build the family we had always dreamed of. When she said that, I knew I had heard enough. I stood up to leave. She begged me to stay. I refused but gave her one last hug and wished her the best before leaving her there alone and crying. Later that night, she sent me a message thanking me for meeting with her and asking if we could still be friends. My answer to that is no, but I didn't even bother responding as I was still stunned by the details I had discovered. The next day, I called Deborah to thank her again for warning me about what was going on and to tell her how I left things with Wendy. I told Deborah that Wendy didn't know it was her who told me, because I told Wendy I had followed her to Randy's house. Talking to Deborah was very comforting, and we ended up talking on the phone for over an hour. Before we ended the call, she suggested we have coffee sometime, and we met up the following Saturday. We got along very well, and we've been dating ever since. I didn't tell Wendy about this, but Deborah did, and that ended their friendship. Deborah said she didn't care, as she had already decided to cut ties with Wendy. Since then, Wendy has tried to contact me several times, but I haven't responded, nor do I intend to. I'm slowly moving forward with Deborah, but I can already see the difference between her and Wendy. Deborah is a person of great quality, unlike Wendy, who is nothing but disposable remnants. Before I finish, I want to thank everyone who responded. Your comments helped me get through this difficult time, and I'm very grateful for that. This brings us to the end of this story. Wendy simply went off for the weekend with someone else after arguing with her boyfriend, and upon returning, still had the audacity to say it wasn't anything serious. Really? Have a little shame and common sense, please. I think the author should thank God for his luck, as he dodged a huge bullet when she rejected him. Wendy showed who she really was, and ending things with her was the right thing to do. Betrayal is unforgivable. I'm sure that after a few months, he won't even miss her. Let's move on to the next story. My unfaithful wife announced she was 5 weeks pregnant after I returned from a 2-month work trip. Hold on. 15 years ago, I was 25 years old and finishing my contract. My then-girlfriend of 3 years, Natalie, was acting stranger and stranger. I returned from a 2-month mission and was prepared to break up with Natalie. She came to give me the good news that she was pregnant. I asked how far along she was, and she said 5 weeks. So I broke up with her and told her she needed to improve in math. She rejected the breakup and insisted the baby was mine. So I said, 1, paternity test. 2, if the child is mine, we can talk about financial support and custody agreements with lawyers. She rejected both and told everyone I was irresponsible for getting her pregnant and then abandoning her. I told them all I had been on a 2-month mission when she conceived, but some insisted, for decency's sake, I should take her in and provide some support. I consulted with a lawyer about this situation, and he made it very clear that any open support I gave her could be interpreted as an acceptance of paternity. So I explained this to my friends, and most of them backed off, except for one guy who insisted again that charity couldn't be used against me legally. I told him that if he believed that, he could take her in. Eventually, he stopped insisting. After that, the baby was born. And I'm not even going to say the classic line, she didn't look like me, because most babies are born with swollen faces. I just saw the picture she sent me with messages like Emma wants to know where her dad is, and things like that. She still refused to do any paternity test, but the fact that she kept showing up with that baby got to the point where I had to request a restraining order against her. Fun fact, in my state, a permanent restraining order is actually not permanent. It only lasts 2 years. The only way to extend it is if there's a violent crime involved. And apparently, bothering someone with a baby that's not theirs isn't a violent crime. So my life for the last 14 years has consisted of renewing the restraining order every 2 years because once it expires, Natalie shows up again with my not daughter. Over time, I met an amazing woman, got married, and now have a 9-year-old son, Henry. My wife is very aware of the situation with Natalie and Emma. Every time the cycle starts again, I always say the same thing, 1, paternity test. 2. If paternity is proven, I will take custody and we'll arrange financial support. Natalie always refuses and says both things are insulting. Recently, the cycle started again, and this time it was worse. First, she approached my son during a school event, a field trip to the zoo, and said, "Hi, I'm your older sister, Emma. Henry knows about the danger of strangers," and ran to find a teacher. I had to have a very painful conversation with the teachers and the parents at the event about my relationship with Emma and Natalie and how Emma has never been my daughter. I even called her not my daughter once or twice during the conversation. After the group dispersed, one of the mothers confronted me and told me that, while Natalie was wrong for telling that poor girl I was her father, calling her not my daughter was cruel. I can understand where she's coming from, but the truth is, I can't help this child. And the reality is, dealing with this cycle every 2 years is as close as I can get to finding a solution. Edited to respond to a repeated question. In my state, the mother must initiate the request to establish paternity and conduct the test. There is no situation where a father can initiate the request. There was an opportunity to do so when Emma was born, but the time window was exactly 1 month. And at that time, I was more focused on getting the restraining order, not realizing that the paternity issue would haunt me later. For everyone saying, just ask for custody, that will force the DNA test, it literally can't be done. I've been through this enough with my lawyer and have consulted other lawyers. There are laws protecting children, and many of them exist for good reasons. Let me explain it the way my lawyer explained it. Imagine a woman running away from an ex. After escaping, she finds out she's pregnant. She gives birth, never puts her ex's name on the birth certificate, and never tries to ask for support because she wants to stay as far away from him as possible. Years later, he finds out and tries to bring her back using the child as leverage. She can simply say no, and the state has to let it go. However, there's one provision. If the father is involved enough to know when the birth occurred, he could send his DNA to the state within 31 days of the birth as a possible father. But that time has already passed. The law was designed this way on purpose. In the eyes of the family court, I am a stranger and have never been recognized by Emma. If you think the state wants every child to be claimed by their fathers and will happily submit to any DNA test every time a potential father shows up, go find a random single mother, call the family court, and say you want to claim her child. I'm tired of everyone acting like all I had to do was fill out a form, and this hell would end. Please just call a lawyer for a free consultation or post in legal forums and ask. It doesn't work that way. Update 1. I just got off the phone with my lawyer. We have a preliminary hearing on the new restraining order this week. A temporary order will likely be issued, and then another hearing for a permanent order. Child Protective Services, CPS, is investigating Natalie and Emma's living situation. The teacher's report carried a lot of weight, and my lawyer believes this could actually be a way to end this madness. Now, in family court for minors, there is something called a court-appointed temporary guardian. I think the term is guardian ad litem, which is a guardian only for legal decisions, including medical issues. If the family court appoints one for Emma, we could ask the temporary guardian for a DNA test to resolve this once and for all. The madness might be coming to an end. Adding more context, I feel the need to explain the relationship I had with Natalie years ago. When I returned from my 2-month mission, I had already decided to break up with her. I'm pregnant, would never have made me marry her. In fact, I doubted she was pregnant for several weeks. In the last year of our relationship, many red flags appeared in her behavior. She demanded I check in with her while at work. I could only hang out with friends in her presence. She had extreme jealous outbursts, and she seemed overly friendly with other women, including waitresses. I was in a job that required me to be away for long periods, which she hated, but it kept me out of her control. I think halfway through that last year, I realized that when I was away, I didn't miss her at all. In fact, I felt relieved to just lie in bed and sleep without thinking about her. When it turned out the pregnancy was real, I made it clear that, with a paternity test, I would pay support, share custody, and be a father, but nothing more. She wanted me to be her husband without questions, without proof, just pure faith and devotion to her and the baby. The test, she insisted, was an insult. There would never have been a relationship to save with Natalie. Following the advice of the first lawyer I hired, the agreement was, No proof, no contact. Update 2. The preliminary hearing on the new restraining order went well. Emma and Natalie were there, and we found out Emma is currently living with her great-grandmother and has a guardian ad litem appointed by the court for legal matters. My lawyer believes this means whatever they found in Natalie's living situation was serious enough to justify Emma's removal, and that the great-grandmother only has physical custody while a guardian handles the legal decisions. During the hearing, we reviewed everything: previous restraining orders, my history with Natalie, everything. My lawyer addressed the guardian's representative and said we were willing to submit to a DNA test to resolve this once and for all. Natalie seemed to be having a meltdown, and her own lawyer was trying to calm her down. The guardian's representative agreed, and we took the DNA test in court. There is now a temporary order in effect while we wait for the second hearing for the permanent 2-year restraining order. The order covers the immediate family from both sides. As I mentioned before, Natalie is really good at following court orders. Curiously, we have about 4 weeks before we get the final results of the test, but honestly, I'm not worried. Update 3. Paternity test result. We got the results at the end of last week. Just as I suspected, I'm not the father. Natalie had a breakdown when she received the news from her grandmother Sylvia. Emma is still living with Sylvia and is now out of Natalie's custody. That breakdown included a huge outburst of anger in my yard, which also violated the temporary restraining order. Natalie was arrested, and Sylvia didn't pay her bail. Sylvia told my lawyer she wanted to apologize for financially supporting Natalie for the past 15 years. I had only met Sylvia a few times when I was dating Natalie, and I knew Natalie grew up with her, but I never knew how much Sylvia had supported her. Sylvia also told my lawyer, which is technically allowed with the restraining order in effect, that both she and Emma wanted to send me an apology letter. I told my lawyer they could write as many letters as they wanted, as long as it was the last communication we had. The permanent restraining order will certainly be granted now, since Natalie violated the temporary order. We still don't know exactly what led to Emma's removal from Natalie's custody or what will happen to Natalie now. Is there an underlying issue if we receive the letters? I'll post the update once I receive them. I received the letters on Friday after my lawyer read them and deemed them acceptable. Sylvia's letter detailed that Natalie had a difficult childhood, things I already knew about her father running away and then her mother abandoning her, leaving Sylvia in charge of raising her. Sylvia explained that she did the best she could with what she had. She also mentioned that she and Emma were doing fine, that she still had some money, not enough to send, but enough for Emma to have a good start in life when she turns 18. Sylvia bought a house in the city for Natalie and Emma to live in, while she lived about an hour north in the countryside. She sent money to Natalie monthly for expenses and visited about 4 times a year, on birthdays, Easter, Thanksgiving, and Christmas. Regarding Emma's living situation, the only thing Sylvia mentioned was that the photos she saw of the house in the city broke her heart. As expected, Sylvia promised she would never financially support Natalie again. Emma's letter was much sadder. It started with Dad, who's not my dad, which struck me as strange. It detailed how Natalie would tell her that if she behaved, I would accept her. According to Emma, my acceptance entirely depended on her doing as she was told. Emma said Sylvia put her into therapy, and that Natalie told them both I was avoiding the DNA test using legal technicalities. She said that when she saw me suggest the test in person, she felt that Natalie was right, that I was capable of accepting her. She felt happy and hopeful. When the results came in, she said it was worse than not knowing anything. She apologized for scaring my son, her brother who's not her brother, as she wrote in the letter. There's a strange tone in her letter, and I feel like she's trying to accept the reality. Reading it hurt a lot, but both of them promised not to interact with us again. Natalie is still in prison. Maybe this is finally over. This brings us to the end of this story. I feel bad for Emma. She was deceived and made to believe her behavior was the reason her father didn't accept her. She just wanted a connection with her father, and now she finds herself without one, not knowing who he could be. Not to mention the fact that her mother lied to her entire life. Fortunately, it seems she's with someone who will do everything possible to help her recover as best she can. I hope she finds peace someday. What do you think of this story? What advice would you give to the author? Let me know in the comments. If you like this video, Support the channel by leaving a like. Thank you so much for the support, and thanks to everyone for watching until the end.